She was pouring a $500 bottle of Burgundy when she saw the thing that was about to get a very dangerous man killed. Betty Roos didn't stop mid-pour, didn't flinch, didn't let a single drop of that deep red wine miss the glass. That was the thing about working the floor at Maison Noire, the city's most exclusive restaurant tucked behind a velvet rope and a door with no sign, the kind of place where powerful men came specifically because the staff knew how to look without seeing and how to hear without listening. Betty had mastered that art down to a science. White button-down, sleeves rolled just below the elbow, black apron pressed sharp, gold hoops catching the low amber candlelight. She moved through the dining room like part of the decor, elegant, efficient, invisible, the kind of woman that wealthy, dangerous men dismissed the moment she set down their glass. That was her greatest weapon. Table 4 tonight was him, Ryong Ji. Dark, shoulder-length hair, navy velvet blazer over a black dress shirt, top buttons undone just enough to let the ink climbing his neck and chest tell a story no one in this room was brave enough to read. He sat the way men sit when they have already won every room they've ever walked into, relaxed, still, terrifyingly calm, like a blade that doesn't need to be raised to be felt. He was on a blind date. The woman across from him was stunning. Dark, softly waved hair, an elegant black dress with thin straps, red lips bold, practiced, deliberate, a single red rose on the table between them. She was laughing at something he had said, her hand resting lightly near her silver metallic clutch, and everything about her screamed soft and romantic and completely harmless. Betty had served enough dangerous people to know that was exactly the point. She approached the table to refill their glasses. The woman smiled up at her warm, easy, the kind of smile designed to put people at ease. Her hand drifted toward the clutch. The clasp clicked open. The candlelight did the rest. For 1/2 of 1 second, the flame caught on something cold and flat and silver inside that purse, and it was not a compact mirror. It was a police badge. Betty finished pouring Ryong's glass, set the bottle down, straightened her apron with one slow, unhurried hand. And then she leaned in. Her lips came within an inch of Ryong Ji's ear, the most dangerous ear in the city, and she said the words that were about to detonate the entire night. Ryong's eyes didn't move. His posture didn't shift. His smile, still aimed at the woman across the table, didn't waver by a single degree. But beneath the table, his tattooed hand closed slowly into a fist. Now, before this story goes any further, if you have ever stood in a moment where you knew something someone else didn't, and felt that exact weight of do I say something, or do I walk away and let it burn, this story was made for you. Because Betty Roos wasn't a hero. She wasn't brave. She was a woman who just wanted to make it to the end of her shift. But some secrets, once you see them, don't let you keep walking. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is reaching. Your answer to this question might surprise you by the time we reach Chapter 10. The first thing Betty Roos did every Friday night was count the exits. Not because she was afraid. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford on a split shift. She counted them the same way she counted her tables, checked her apron pocket for her wine key, and confirmed the ice wells were topped before the dinner rush out of discipline. Out of the particular kind of survival instinct that gets quietly installed in a person who has spent enough years watching the wrong kind of people eat very expensive meals. Maison Noire had 4 exits. The grand front entrance with its brushed brass handles and the doorman who never smiled. The side door off the bar corridor that the bartenders used for smoke breaks. The fire exit at the back of the kitchen that nobody used unless someone was running. And the basement service door steel, unmarked. The kind of door that doesn't appear on any public floor plan that connected to a loading corridor and eventually surfaced in the alley behind the building. Betty knew every inch of this restaurant the way a surgeon knows the inside of a chest cavity. 4 years on, this floor had given her that. She knew which service corridor light had been dead since October. She knew the loading dock junction box sat 12 steps past the basement ramp on the left wall, and that a single pull of its main breaker took the whole dock dark. 4 years of polishing glassware until her reflection stared back at her from the curve of a wine glass. 4 years of navigating between tables with a bottle in one hand and a smile trained to reveal absolutely nothing. The dining room at Maison Noire was the kind of place that made ordinary people feel watched. Dark walnut paneling on every wall, low amber lighting that turned everyone golden and a little mysterious. Candles burning at the center of every table, real wax, not electric, because the owner understood that real flame made people feel like whatever they were doing mattered. Deep green velvet booth seating, heavy curtains, the kind of soft jazz that was just loud enough to make the table next to you disappear. It smelled like good butter and aged oak, and the specific kind of money that doesn't need to announce itself. The clientele matched the room. There were city councilmen at table 2 who were almost certainly not discussing city council business. There was a real estate developer at table 7 who had been coming here every Thursday and Friday for 3 years without once bringing the same woman twice. At the bar, 2 men in identical dark blazers nursed identical glasses of bourbon and had not said a word to each other or anyone else in 40 minutes, which Betty had clocked, the way she clocked everything. She moved through all of it like water finding its level. Invisible, efficient, watching. Her section ran along the left side of the restaurant, 4 tables deep, anchored at the far end by the VIP booth table 4, semicircular, elevated slightly on its own little platform, framed on 3 sides by a curtain that could be drawn for privacy, but tonight was pulled open. It was the best seat in the house, which meant it was reserved for the worst people in the city. Tonight it belonged to Ryong-ji. She saw him come in at 8:14, not because she was watching the door, but because the room changed when he entered. It was subtle, a slight drop in ambient noise, the way a few sets of eyes moved toward the entrance and then very deliberately moved away. The maitre d' materialized instantly, moving with the particular kind of urgency reserved for guests you do not make wait under any circumstances. Betty had already pulled the burgundy. Ryong-ji was not a tall man, but he carried himself with the kind of density that made space feel smaller around him. The navy velvet blazer fit like it had been constructed specifically for his shoulders. Beneath it, a black dress shirt, the top 2 buttons open not carelessly, but with the deliberate ease of a man who has nothing left to prove to anyone in this room or any other. The tattoos began at his collarbone and climbed his neck in dark, intricate lines, botanical and geometric all at once, the kind of ink that has a story behind every session. His hair was dark and slightly long, brushing his jaw, framing a face that was handsome in a way that felt dangerous, symmetrical, unreadable, the face of a man who has trained himself to give nothing away. He was not alone. The woman beside him was the kind of beautiful that required a second look, not because beauty was scarce in this room, but because hers was constructed. Everything about her had been chosen. The dark evening dress with its thin straps, the softly waved dark hair that fell just past her shoulders, the red lips bold, classic, the exact shade that photographs well in low light. She walked slightly behind him, not subordinately, but strategically, the way someone walks when they want to be watched arriving but don't want to be the one who seems to care about it. She was carrying a small silver clutch. Betty noticed it the way she noticed everything, catalogued it, filed it, moved on. She poured water at table 2, checked in on table 6, brought a bread basket to table 1 without being asked, and drifted back toward table 4 with the burgundy and 2 glasses just as Ryong and his date were settling into the booth. She introduced herself. She presented the bottle. She went through the ritual with the cork and the tasting pour, smooth and practiced, the kind of service that costs money but feels effortless. Ryong acknowledged her with a glance that lasted exactly 1 second, long enough to confirm she existed, brief enough to make clear he had already categorized her as furniture. His date smiled with her whole face and said the wine was lovely. Betty smiled back and meant nothing by it, and went to check on table 6. The dinner service moved the way good services do, seamlessly, almost invisibly, the machinery of the kitchen and the floor running on its own momentum. Betty carried and poured and cleared and smiled. She watched the room the way she always watched it, the low hum of awareness constant and automatic beneath everything she did. At table 4, Ryong and his date were doing what people on blind dates do, talking, leaning in, performing the specific theater of 2 people deciding whether to trust each other. He was charming in a way that seemed reluctant, like the charm was always there, but he had to choose to let it show. She laughed at the right moments, asked questions, touched her hair once, rested her chin on her hand in the candlelight. It looked exactly like a date. Betty refilled their water and disappeared. It was somewhere around 9 o'clock when the woman excused herself from the table. A light touch on Ryung's hand, a murmured word, and she stood and moved toward the back of the restaurant where the restrooms were tucked behind a frosted glass partition. Betty tracked it the way she tracked all movement on her floor peripherally, automatically, not staring. She used the 6 minutes to check her other tables, run a dessert menu to table 2, and confirm the bread situation at table 1. By the time the woman returned to table 4, Betty was already moving toward it with the burgundy, timing the approach the way she always did, unhurried, natural, arriving exactly when it looked like a coincidence. The woman slid back into the booth and reached for the silver clutch. Betty was 3 steps away. The clasp opened with a soft metallic click. The woman's fingers moved inside lipstick, presumably the kind of gesture so ordinary it barely registers. Betty was 2 steps away, bottle angled slightly, her left hand rising to support its base. The candlelight was doing what candlelight does, throwing small, warm, honest light onto everything it touched. Betty's eyes moved across the table the way they always moved, assessing, cataloging, moving on. Glasses, water levels, centerpiece, rose, clutch. She stopped. Not her feet. Her feet kept moving, one smooth, practiced step after another, because 4 years of training had made her body independent of the thing currently happening inside her chest. But everything that was actually Betty, the part behind the eyes, the part that made decisions, went absolutely, completely still. Inside the silver clutch, beneath the woman's searching fingers, resting against the dark silk lining like it was the most natural thing in the world to carry to a dinner date, was a police badge. It was not subtle. It was not ambiguous. The candlelight hit it with a kind of blunt honesty, the flat face of the shield, the raised emblem, the particular cold gleam of official metal that Betty had been around enough in her life to recognize without question. She arrived at the table. She poured. The burgundy moved from bottle to glass in a slow, controlled arc, deep red and perfect, not a single drop off course. Her left hand steady, her right hand steady, her face serene, professional, a small, polite smile saying absolutely nothing. The woman found her lipstick, drew the clutch slightly closed, uncapped the tube and touched it to her lips with the small, satisfied precision of a woman refreshing herself between courses. Betty set the bottle down, straightened, glanced at both glasses, and then she looked at Ryung-ji. He was watching his date apply her lipstick with an expression of mild, pleasant attention. He did not look at Betty. He had no reason to look at Betty. Betty was furniture. She reached for his glass to reposition it slightly, a small, unnecessary adjustment that brought her close enough that the distance between her lips and his ear collapsed to almost nothing, and she leaned down under the pretense of setting the glass to the left of the candle, where it technically had slightly better clearance, and she spoke, quiet enough that the jazz swallowed it, quiet enough that it registered as less than a breath to anyone more than 8 inches away. 5 words. She's an undercover cop. She straightened, picked up the bottle, checked the label out of habit, took 2 steps back from the table with the natural, unhurried ease of a woman who had just refilled a glass and had 3 other tables to get to. Ryung-ji did not move. Not his hands, not his shoulders, not the angle of his jaw or the direction of his gaze. But something happened in the half-second after Betty spoke, something that had nothing to do with movement, and everything to do with the thing that happens behind a person's eyes when the entire architecture of their evening rearranges itself. It was there, and then it was gone, so fast that if Betty hadn't been trained by 4 years of reading this exact category of dangerous man, she might have missed it entirely. His date finished with her lipstick, capped it, and looked up at him with that warm, constructed smile. Ryung smiled back. It was a perfect smile. Easy, warm, slightly intimate, the smile of a man who is genuinely enjoying his evening. He picked up his wineglass and tilted it in a small private toast, and she laughed softly and matched it, and the candlelight made everything look exactly like a romance. Betty walked to table 6. Her hands were completely steady. She did not know when that had happened. She gave herself until table 6 to feel the particular electric vertigo of having just done something she could not undo, and then she filed it away and became furniture again, and did her job, and watched. Ryong-ji, from across the room, was doing the same thing she was doing. He was watching. She could see it now, in the minute calibration of his gaze. On the surface, it never left his date. He was attentive, leaning in occasionally, asking questions, laughing when she laughed. The performance was flawless, but his eyes, when they moved with a specific kind of efficiency that had nothing to do with the conversation. They swept the room in small, natural increments. The bar, the entrance, the corridor toward the kitchen. The 2 men in matching blazers who were still nursing their bourbon at the bar and had now somehow managed to drink even less than before. Betty counted 6 plainclothes officers before her next bread run. The 2 at the bar were obvious now that she knew what to look for, the way they sat, the way their weight was distributed, the way neither of them had touched their food. There was a woman at the foretop near the entrance who had been reading the same page of her menu for 20 minutes. A man at the bar stool closest to the side corridor who kept his phone face down on the bar and his right hand consistently close to his jacket. Near the back, a couple at table 10 who had been nursing a single shared appetizer for an hour and had no wine, which at Maison Noire was the kind of oversight that didn't actually happen unless you weren't there for the food. 6, possibly 7. At table 4, Ryong was talking about travel. She could catch fragments as she moved through her section. His voice was measured and unhurried, with the faint residue of an accent that surfaced occasionally, like a watermark. He was asking his date about somewhere she'd been, somewhere warm. She was answering with the practiced detail of someone who had researched her cover story thoroughly. She described a hotel, a coastline, a meal she'd had at sunset. Ryong listened, nodded, asked a follow-up question about the restaurant, the name of it, the neighborhood, the street it was on. His date answered smoothly, didn't hesitate. Ryong tilted his head slightly, the way someone tilts their head when something almost confirms itself, and said that was interesting, because he believed that particular restaurant had closed 2 years ago. He said it lightly, pleasantly, the way you mention a minor correction to a friend who has slightly misremembered something harmless. His date's smile didn't break. She laughed softly and said she might be confusing it with somewhere else she'd visited so many places. They started to blur. And she touched her wine glass and redirected the conversation toward him, and it moved on. But it had happened. Betty had been close enough to clock it, the nearly invisible seam between one version of the evening and whatever came next. Ryong had probed. She had recovered. And now both of them were sitting across from each other, performing the exact same thing. The appearance of enjoying a date, while running a completely different calculation beneath it. Betty cleared table 2's starter plates and kept moving. At some point in the next 20 minutes, with the kind of timing that was either very deliberate or very well practiced, Ryong became a man who needed his napkin replaced. She had replaced napkins hundreds of times. It was a small, frequent ritual in a restaurant of this caliber. A soiled napkin, a quick exchange, barely worth noting. She brought the fresh linen to the table, gathered the used one from his lap in the standard fold, and was 3 steps away before she felt the weight of it. She didn't stop walking. The napkin was folded into a neat square, the way she always folded them before setting them on the collection tray, and as her fingers moved through the reflex of that motion, she felt the stiffness, a small, dense shape pressed flat inside the linen. She didn't open it. She kept walking, made it to the service station at the back of the floor, and stood with her back to the room for exactly the amount of time it takes to reload a breadbasket. Inside the napkin, folded twice and printed in small, precise characters more drawn than written, the kind of handwriting that has trained itself to take up as little space as possible, was a sequence of numbers and a single word. She read it once, folded the napkin again, put it in her apron pocket. Then she picked up the breadbasket, went back to table 1, and began doing the arithmetic. The numbers were a time, and she was fairly certain of frequency, not an address. The single word was a name, or a call sign. Something with one syllable that she would not let herself repeat even inside her own head, because the two men at the bar had shifted position in the last 10 minutes, and one of them was now angled toward her section. The instruction embedded in all of it was not written, but it was clear the way certain things are clear when someone has handed them to you in a folded napkin in the middle of a police sting operation. Get this outside. Specifically, outside to wherever Ryong's driver was parked, which, in Betty's experience of the last 4 years, was the black SUV that appeared on the side street by 9:30 on any night Ryong came in. Engine running, positioned with its nose toward the arterial road the way you park a car when leaving quickly, is the whole point. The problem was that between Betty and the side street were approximately 6 plainclothes officers, one of whom was now sitting at the bar directly adjacent to the corridor that led to the side door. Betty thought about this for exactly as long as it took her to finish the bread table and return to the service station. She pulled out her phone, texted the kitchen that Table 6's main course was running behind, and could someone check the pass, a message that meant nothing and everything, because it gave her a legitimate reason to walk to the kitchen. And the kitchen's receiving corridor had a secondary access point that opened onto the side alley, 40 feet from the side street. She put the phone away, checked her apron, smoothed the front of it once, a habit, a small ritual of composure. The man at the bar near the corridor had his phone out now and was scrolling with the focused disinterest of someone performing boredom. His right hand had migrated to the bar top. His jacket sat slightly differently than it had 20 minutes ago. Betty picked up the bread basket for Table 3, because Table 3 always needed more bread, and she walked the long route to get there, the route that took her past the bar, past the man with the phone, past the corridor entrance, and into the smooth, warm, butter-scented chaos of the kitchen without pausing, without altering her pace, without giving any single person in that dining room a reason to file her under anything other than waitress, unimportant, ignore. The receiving corridor was cold and fluorescent after the amber warmth of the dining room. Her footsteps changed on the concrete floor. She passed the dry goods shelving, the chef's office with its always open door, the industrial rack of clean linens, and pushed through the secondary door into the side alley. The night air came in fast and cold and smelled like rain that hadn't landed yet. She counted the steps to the corner. The black SUV was exactly where she knew it would be engine on, exhaust drifting in the cold air, the driver a shape behind dark glass that she had seen from a distance 100 times but never spoken to. She walked to it the way she would walk to anything, with purpose but without urgency, the particular cadence of a woman who works here and is briefly outside for a legitimate reason. The window came down 2 inches. She did not look at the face behind it. She pulled the folded napkin from her apron pocket, held it to the gap, felt it taken, and turned around. She was back in the kitchen corridor in under 90 seconds. At the pass, she confirmed Table 6's main course was plated and ready. She picked it up. She pushed back through the kitchen door and into the amber light and the jazz and the expensive smell of the dining room, and she walked to Table 6, and she set down their plates, and she asked if there was anything else they needed, and they said no, and she smiled and moved on. At Table 4, Ryong-ji was listening to his date describe a film she had recently seen. He was nodding slowly, his wine glass resting lightly in his fingers, his face a portrait of unhurried attention, but his eyes, passing briefly across Betty as she re-entered the room, held for exactly 1 beat. Not 2, 1. The kind of acknowledgement that passes between 2 people who are currently running the same risk inside the same room and have just done something together that cannot be taken back. Betty looked away first. She had tables to check. The night was still moving, and the exits still numbered 4, and the men at the bar were still watching, and none of this, not the napkin, not the alley, not the 5 words she had whispered into the most dangerous ear in the city, had landed them on the other side of anything yet. The net was still closing. She could feel it, the way you feel weather before it breaks a change in pressure, invisible and certain. She went back to work. She poured. She smiled. She watched. And across the room, behind a perfect smile and a glass of very good Burgundy, Ryong-ji was doing exactly the same thing. The shift happened at 9:53. Betty clocked it the way she clocked everything, not by looking directly at it, but by feeling the room change around it. She was clearing the amuse-bouche from table 3 when the woman at the foretop near the entrance stopped pretending to read her menu. She set it down, flat, the way you set something down when you no longer need the prop. Her eyes moved to the bar, found the man closest to the corridor, and held for exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds is a long time when you know what you're looking for. Across the room, the man returned the look with a slight dip of his chin. Not a nod too obvious. Just a fractional drop. The kind of signal that lives below the threshold of casual observation. Betty set the small plates on her tray and did not change her pace. At table 4, Ryong was finishing a story about somewhere he had traveled. She caught the tail of it as she passed, his voice unhurried, his hands relaxed on the table. His date was laughing. But the laugh, Betty noticed, had changed register. It was still warm, still constructed, but there was something underneath it now, a tightening, a recalibration. The woman had been running her own calculation all evening, and something in the last few minutes had shifted the numbers. Ryong had held her too long, asked one too many questions about her story, smiled in a way that never quite reached the back of his eyes. She knew he knew. And now the whole operation was adjusting in real time. Betty made it to the service station and set her tray down and stood with her back to the room for 3 seconds, long enough to run the count. The man near the corridor had straightened on his stool. The couple at table 10 had both put their phones away simultaneously, the particular synchronization of people who have just received the same instruction. Near the front, the maître had been quietly redirected to the host stand and was now standing very still, the way people stand when they've been told to stand there and not interfere with whatever comes next. The front doors. She looked without looking. The brass-handled entrance at the far end of the room had, in the last several minutes, acquired a new figure. A man in a dark coat standing just inside the vestibule, shoulders squared, not waiting for a table, not checking a phone, simply occupying the space between the door and the dining room with the specific solidity of someone whose job it is to make sure that door stops being an exit. Betty counted, adjusted, ran it again. Every exit she had counted at the start of the evening was now covered except one, the basement service door. Steel, unmarked, not on any public floor plan. She had approximately as long as it took Ryong's date to decide to stop performing. She picked up her tray and walked toward the kitchen. She had worked the floor at Maison Noire for 4 years, which meant she had worked alongside Marcus, the senior line cook, for 4 years. Marcus was a large, meticulous man who ran the hotline with the focused authority of someone who had decided long ago that the kitchen was the only place in the world that made sense, and he kept it accordingly, every station clean, every burner calibrated, every vat of frying oil brought to temperature, and monitored with the kind of diligence that kept a professional kitchen from becoming a liability. The fry station sat at the far left of the hotline, closest to the exhaust hood. The oil in the main vat ran at 350 degrees on a Friday service. Next to it, the secondary vat held the duck confit prep higher volume, slightly higher temp, currently at 380, and climbing toward its working temperature for the next course. Above both vats, the exhaust hood hung low and efficient, and above the hood, the suppression system sensor blinked its small green light with the patient reliability of something that had never actually been needed. Betty crossed the kitchen to the pass, confirmed a plate for table 2 with the expediter, and then turned left along the hot line under the pretense of checking on a dietary restriction she needed to relay to Marcus. She said it quietly, her voice low under the noise of the kitchen. Something about table 1, something about a modification, and Marcus half turned to answer her. She was already at the fry station. It took less than 4 seconds. A full ladle of the duck prep stock sitting in the bain-marie beside the station, lifted and tipped, not into the vat but against the outer wall of the secondary vat, where the heat was highest and the surface was dry, and the oil residue from 3 services this week had accumulated in a thin, invisible film along the metal casing. The flame came faster than she expected. Not an explosion, a flash, a sudden orange bloom that went from nothing to everything in the space between one breath and the next, racing up the grease-filmed surface of the casing toward the exhaust hood with the gleeful efficiency of fire that has found exactly what it needs. The hood caught the draft and threw it upward, and the suppression sensor went from green to red in the time it took Betty to take 3 steps back toward the pass. The suppression system discharged, the kitchen filled with a sound like a pressure valve releasing. And then, every alarm in the building woke up at once. The sound hit the dining room like a physical thing, the sustained, penetrating shriek of the fire suppression alarm, designed by people who understood that in an emergency, ambiguity kills. The ambient jazz cut off mid-bar. The lighting system, tripped by the alarm circuit, shifted to its emergency mode, the amber warmth of the dining room dropping to the flat. Bright utility of the safety overrides for exactly 4 seconds before the main panel registered the kitchen suppression discharge, and the system defaulted to the protocol nobody had ever tested. Full lights down, emergency strips on, controlled evacuation lighting only. The dining room went dark. Not completely, the thin green strips along the baseboards and the faint red of the exit signs remained, carving the room into shadows and geometry. But the candlelight was gone, blown by the pressure of the alarm system's ventilation response, and the amber warmth that had made everything feel like a secret was replaced by the dim, disorienting reality of a room full of expensive furniture and suddenly very frightened wealthy people. The noise started immediately. Chairs scraping. Someone at table 3 standing fast enough to catch the tablecloth. Voices rising. A woman near the entrance saying something sharp. A man near the bar already moving toward the front, and the plainclothes officers, every single one of them, faced a decision they had not planned for. Hold position on an operation that was now compromised by a building evacuation, or break cover to manage the crowd and lose the element of control entirely. Betty was already moving. She came back through the kitchen door into the dining room at the exact moment the lights dropped, which meant she entered darkness that everyone else was adjusting to, and she had the advantage of knowing exactly which direction she needed to move. She went left, along the wall, away from the evacuation current that was pulling people toward the entrance, away from the bar corridor and the plainclothes man who had been positioned there, moving fast and low through the shadow at the room's edge, toward the VIP platform at the far end. She heard the table 4 situation before she saw it. A sound, short, blunt, the specific percussion of a piece of heavy furniture meeting a hard floor, and then voices, sharp and close and no longer performing anything. The elegant veneer of the evening, which had been eroding for the last 20 minutes, came apart all at once. She reached the edge of the VIP platform. In the thin emergency lighting, she could see the table on its side. Ryong had moved it in the first second after the lights dropped, putting it between himself and his date with the instant. Unthinking efficiency of someone for whom a table is always first a shield. The wine glasses were gone, the burgundy spreading across the velvet seat in the dark. The red rose was on the floor. His date was on her feet. The silver clutch was gone. What was in her hand instead was smaller and darker, and aimed at the space where Ryong had been standing a half-second ago. She had stopped being a date completely. The red lips and the soft hair and the warm laugh were still there. Technically, the face was the same face, but everything animating it had changed. Her stance had changed. The way she held her weight had changed. She moved around the edge of the overturned table with the controlled, trained precision of someone who does this for a living. And her eyes were scanning the shadows behind the booth with the flat, professional attention of a person who is not here to arrest anyone. Betty had understood this from the moment she had seen the badge. But seeing it confirmed the gun, the stance, the absence of any warning or announcement that a real arrest would require, made something settle coldly in her chest. This woman was not here to take Ryong into custody. She was here to make sure he didn't leave. Betty moved onto the platform. She did not think about it in the way that thinking usually works. Consideration, decision, action. It happened faster than that. She came off the wall low and fast, and the thing she grabbed was the wine stand, the heavy floor-standing chrome holder that lived at the edge of the VIP section and held the backup bottle. And she swung it not at the woman but at the gun hand, the arc of it connecting with the woman's wrist with a dull, resonant impact that sent the weapon skidding across the platform floor into the shadow beneath the booth seat. The woman turned on her with a speed that confirmed everything. But Ryong was already there. He came out of the shadows behind the booth. He had been 3 feet to the left of where she was aiming, which meant he had moved in the first fraction of the chaos, and waited, and the interaction that followed was brief and brutal and entirely one-sided. He was not a large man, but he moved like someone for whom violence has always been a precise economic language, and it was over in the time it took Betty to take 2 steps back. The woman went down against the booth seat, conscious but not immediately mobile. From the direction of the front entrance, Betty could hear the plainclothes officers breaking toward the back of the restaurant. The evacuation had fractured their cordon, civilians moving against the flow, alarms still screaming, emergency lighting turning the room into a confusion of shadows and shapes, but they were reorganizing. She could hear it in the footsteps, the coordination of it, the way multiple sets of movement were converging on the VIP section from 2 angles. Ryong straightened. He looked at Betty across the overturned table in the thin green light. There was no surprise in his face. No gratitude yet. No calculation, just the clean, immediate attention of a man who has reduced the moment to its single relevant question. She answered it before he asked. "Follow me," she said. "Don't stop." She went left off the platform. Not toward the kitchen. They would expect the kitchen. The kitchen was the obvious route. The kitchen was where the fire had started, and where every instinct would point but toward the narrow service door set into the wall at the far left of the dining room, behind the last velvet curtain. The door that said, "Staff Only," in small brass letters, and was kept locked with a code that Betty had memorized on her 3rd week, and used exactly once before tonight. She punched the code by feel. The door opened. The service corridor on the other side was nothing like the dining room. It was pure function, bare concrete walls, industrial lighting currently running on emergency power at half strength, the smell of cleaning chemicals and old stone, and something metallic in the cold air. Pipes running along the ceiling. The noise of the restaurant alarm muffled but still present, pulsing through the walls. She moved fast. Ryong was directly behind her, close enough that she could hear his breathing controlled, measured, not panicked. The corridor ran the length of the building and then turned, and she took the turn without hesitating, because she had walked this route in her head 100 times, in the abstract way you think about things you hope you never need. Behind them, the staff door opened. She heard it, the distinct sound of the code being punched by someone who had gotten it from a building schematic. The kind of preparation that spoke to how long this operation had been planned. And then footsteps in the corridor. Not 1 set. 2. Moving fast. Ryong said nothing. She didn't look back. The corridor descended a short ramp, barely perceptible, that marked the transition from the restaurant's ground level to the building's service basement. The lighting dropped further here, 2 of the emergency strips dead or disconnected, stretches of near-total darkness between islands of dim utility light. Betty moved through the dark sections from memory. Left wall, 8 steps, then the ceiling clears, then the junction. At the junction, 3 options. Left went to the boiler room dead end. Straight went to the linen storage and the freight elevator, which required a key she didn't have. Right went down a secondary passage to the loading dock and the steel service door. She went right. The footsteps behind them were gaining. 1 set was disciplined, measured, tactical, someone moving through an unknown space with training. The other was faster and less controlled, covering ground at the expense of precision. She could hear the difference, and it told her something. They were not moving together. They were competing, and that meant at least one of them had a motive beyond the official operation. The passage narrowed, overhead pipes forcing a slight crouch. Betty knew this bent automatically, kept moving. She heard Ryong adjust behind her without being told. A light came on behind them. Not the emergency strips, a handheld beam, a tactical flashlight, sweeping the passage. It caught the back wall ahead of them and threw their shadows long and sharp against the concrete. Betty grabbed the junction box on the left wall without slowing. It controlled the loading dock lights, and she had watched the facilities manager operate it once, 14 months ago, on an afternoon when the delivery entrance was being repaired and she had been sent down to direct the wine order. She found the main breaker by touch, gripped it, and pulled. The loading dock went dark. Complete dark. Not emergency strip dark, actual dark, the kind that has texture and weight and makes the body unsure of itself. She heard the person behind them stop moving, heard them recalibrate. The flashlight beam swung toward the ceiling, confused by the sudden change. Betty had Ryong's jacket sleeve. She moved by the map she had built in her memory. 12 steps straight, the dock platform edge, step down 6 inches onto the dock floor, 20 feet across the dock floor. The steel door with the horizontal push bar at waist height, no code required from the inside. She hit the push bar with her hip, and the door opened, and the night came in. Cold air, the smell of rain. The alley stretched left and right, the ambient glow of the city above it turning the wet pavement faintly orange. Above them, the fire alarm was a thin, distant sound, muffled by concrete and distance. She let go of his jacket. They stood in the alley for exactly 2 seconds, both of them breathing. Then, from the left end of the alley, headlights came on. Not 1 set. 3. The black SUV she knew, and behind it 2 more vehicles she didn't, their headlights low and angled down the alley in a configuration that turned the wet ground between them into a long, illuminated path. Doors opening. Figures stepping out dark clothing, hands visible, moving with the particular economy of men who are very good at their jobs and have been waiting to do them. Behind her, somewhere in the chaos of the dining room, the woman with the red lips was already getting back up. Betty didn't need to see it to know it. Women like that didn't stay down. They regrouped, they redirected, and they remembered every face that had gotten in their way. Ryong walked toward them. She didn't. He stopped after 4 steps, turned. In the headlight glow, she could see him properly for the first time since the lights had dropped in the dining room, the velvet blazer still somehow intact, the dark shirt, the tattoos above his collar catching the wet light. Something at his temple that was either shadow or a cut, she couldn't tell. His hair had come slightly forward and he hadn't pushed it back. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. There was something different in his face now than there had been all evening. Not warm. Exactly warmth wasn't a thing she associated with this man, and she doubted she ever would. But it was direct, in a way the rest of the evening hadn't been. The unreadable surface was still there, but something beneath it was addressing her without the usual architecture of misdirection. He said, "You knew what you were doing when you poured that wine. It wasn't a question." Betty looked at him across the wet alley. Behind her, inside the building, she could hear the muffled emergency of the situation she had just exited, the alarm, the footsteps, the dissolving operation. In front of her, 3 vehicles and a collection of men who moved like weapons. "I knew what I was doing," she said. He nodded once, reached inside his jacket and produced something small. A card, plain, a number printed on it in the same small, precise characters as the napkin he had passed her 2 hours ago. He held it out, didn't move toward her with it, made her close the distance or not. "Monday," he said. "You call that number. Someone answers. You say your name once. If you don't call by midnight, I'll assume you went back to pouring wine." The rain that had been threatening all evening finally arrived, not dramatically, not a downpour, just a quiet, steady beginning, the kind of rain that commits to itself without announcement. It touched the pavement and his jacket and her apron and the card in his extended hand. Betty thought about her section. The 4 tables she would not go back to tonight, the burgundy spreading across the velvet booth seat, the bread basket she had left at table 1, the tips she would not collect. The employment she almost certainly no longer had. She thought about the badge in the silver clutch, the gun in the woman's trained hand, the footsteps in the corridor that had been moving faster than the official operation required, chasing something personal in the dark. She thought about 4 years of being furniture. She took the card. Ryong looked at it in her hand for a moment, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, just with the level attention of a man confirming that the information has been received. Then he turned toward the waiting convoy and walked the length of the alley without looking back. The SUV doors closed. The engines turned. The headlights swept the wet walls of the alley as the vehicles moved, and then they were gone, tail lights reddening the rain for a moment before the alley returned to its ordinary darkness. Betty stood in the rain with the card in her hand and the fire alarm still faint in the walls behind her. She looked at the card once, at the number, at the clean, Minimal precision of how it had been printed. Nothing extra. Nothing wasted. Just the exact amount of information required. She folded it and put it in her apron pocket, next to where the napkin had been. Then she stood in the alley for one more moment, the rain coming down steadily now, and let herself feel the full weight of what the evening had been, the before and the after of it. The enormous difference between the woman who had counted exits at the start of a Friday dinner service and the woman standing here now, soaked apron, steady hands, a number in her pocket that led somewhere she could not yet see. The alarm stopped. In the sudden quiet, the rain sounded very clear. Betty Ruse smoothed the front of her apron, out of habit, out of the 4-year ritual of composure, and looked at the dark mouth of the alley for a long moment. Then she walked, not back inside, forward toward the far end of the alley where it opened onto the side street, toward the city and the rain and whatever came next. She walked the way she had walked the dining room floor every night for 4 years, with purpose, with precision, with the particular elegant calm of a woman who sees everything and shows nothing. Only now, for the first time, she was walking towards something instead of simply through it. Monday was 3 days away. She already knew she was going to call. Can Ryong and Betty outrun a corrupt operation that has already decided they are both loose ends? And what dark secret is the woman with the red lips still hiding about who really sent her to that table tonight? Smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you do not want to miss what happens next. This story is about to get so much darker. Drop a comment. Do you think Betty made the right call taking that card, or did she just trade one dangerous life for something far worse? Like this video if you are completely obsessed with this neo-noir dangerous alliance between a waitress and a mafia boss that keeps getting more deadly by the minute. The next chapter drops soon, and trust me, you are not ready for the truth about what that badge was really covering up. See you in the next one if Betty and Ryong survive long enough to find it.